Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Martina24 in the 15-minute pool on ICC. I'm black in this game, and they open with e4. I'm just going to check their stats. They have a peak rating of 2085, about 1,700 15-minute games played. Let's go Sicilian, the trusty Sicilian. And if they play an open Sicilian, I'll have my usual bevy of options. Okay, b3. I'm going to play b6 against this move. Probably not technically the best reply. But if white can get away with playing b3, probably black can play b6 as well. And I'm attacking this pawn now with tempo. So we're going to have an offbeat game. Knight c3 just defends the pawn. If knight f6, then e5 is something I would have to contend with. So like I'm thinking knight f6, e5, knight d5, there is queen f3. Yeah, and then my knight is kind of pinned. If knight takes c3, there's queen takes b7. So I should probably play something like knight c6 first. Knight c6 looks like a better move. Or d6 maybe? d6 would be flexible. Yeah, maybe d6. Let's play d6 instead. I think I like that a bit more. Maybe this knight wants to go to d7 instead of c6. They play f4, okay. So if I play knight f6 now, is e5 still a problem? Knight f6, e5, d takes e5, f takes e5, knight d5. I'm worried that a bishop b4 check move could disrupt our play. If knight e7 instead, then knight f3, and I might struggle to play knight f6. I think knight f6 would be the critical move right now. There's little doubt in my mind that that would be the case. But I'm just worried about e5. That's the move that would be bothersome. Maybe a6, just to keep a piece out of the b5 square. So a6, knight f3, maybe e6 then. I'm making a lot of pawn moves in this case. That could be okay, though. I think that might be all right, because their bishop is going to have a hard time finding a good square in that case. So if knight f3, let's just play e6. And see where they put this light square bishop. Maybe they'll play g3 and try to fianchetto it. Because obviously they can't go to b5 now. They can't go to c4. d3 seems kind of ridiculous. e2 seems passive. Okay, so with that move, they're putting a stop to b5. Maybe the idea is to play bishop c4. I can play knight f6 now. Knight f6, e5, pawn takes. It's probably okay. Or knight c6 or knight d7 move first before knight f6. Decisions. Okay, let's play knight f6. We'll be direct. We'll see if they play e5. If e5, I'm thinking about a couple things. One, just play knight f to d7. And two, possibly take first on e5 and then play knight f d7 or knight d5. They play bishop d3. Seems awkward. Okay, we'll just play knight c6. I'm all right with blocking the bishop now because I'm not going to be able to pressure e4 any more than I already am. Also, I want to leave d7 open for the other knight to go to. So now if I play bishop e7 and they go e5, I can trade on e5 and then play knight takes e5. And if knight takes e5, I have queen d4 check, forking the king and the knight that would be on e5. That should be a clean pawn if I'm able to do that. So let's play this. That's a typical trap in the Sicilian, in fact. I doubt they play e5, but it's something that will cross their mind at least. Queen e1 might not be a bad move. And there the queen can come to the king side later, like g3 or h4. Also, it helps with the e5 push. Backs up that move. Probably I want to go knight b4 sometime soon. Attack this bishop on d3, and the bishop can't move in many cases because c2 would be hanging. Yeah, so they do play queen e1. So possibly knight b4 now, prior to castling, because I think if I castles, they'll probably just play e5. So knight b4 strives for activity. Knight d4 is also possible, trying to block the long diagonal. Knight d4, knight takes d4, c takes d4, maybe just knight e2 then. Let's go knight b4. We'll attack that bishop and the pawn on c2. This is a pesky move. Also opens up our light square bishop too. I have not yet castled, but the position is closed enough to warrant keeping my king in the center a bit longer. So I think it's fine. White could play knight g3, hitting the pawn on g7. But I think I would just castle in that case. Knight g5, really. So if I play h6, are you going to h3? I don't quite get it. Strange looking move. I mean, sometimes white will do this in order to uncover their rook on the f file, but I have a hard time believing that this is a good move. All right, show me what you got. Knight h3 coming. Knight back to f3. Wow. So white's willing to expend 2 tempos to make me play h6. Not what I would have done, but I can kind of see why h6 is a weakening move. Now, should I just castle or should I play something else? If I castle, e5 will be something that white will consider. So castles e5. Let's say knight takes d3, c takes d3. We take e5. That position should be fine for me. Yeah, that will be fine. I could also keep my king in the center longer. Like queen c7 is flexible. The longer I wait, though, the more likely they'll just play e5 anyways. Okay, let's just castle. I'm going to hold that bishop hostage on d3 for a while. I don't feel the need to take it yet, because it can't move. Even after this move, it can't move. Because if it goes to c4, I can play d5, and e2 doesn't look like a good square in view of knight takes e4. So maybe just rook c8 now? Looks decent. Let's do that. If he can play rook c1, I can play rook c8. Just remains to be seen whether white wants to push a pawn. They seem hesitant to push either the f or the e pawns at the moment, but certainly that's critical if they do. I think they're uncomfortable with this bishop on d3. Otherwise, they wouldn't have played rook c1 to overprotect c2. So playing rook c8 quickly and throwing the move back at them is a good decision, I think. I mean, even if bishop e2 works for tactical reasons, like say after bishop e2 that I actually don't want to take on e4 for some reason, I still like my knight on b4. It's still a huge bother for him. Or her. What to do now for white? Queen g3 makes sense in a lot of cases. I was just going to say, it's funny how like you can think about one move and then your opponent will also like think about it or play it simultaneously. Because there's some pressure on g7 with this bishop lurking on b2. Like if these knights are ever gone. You know, queen takes g7 is staring me in the face. I kind of thought like I could always meet this move with knight h5 and attack the queen and the pawn, but they can go queen g4 against that. So, I mean, I could repeat the position once. Knight h5, queen g4, knight f6. I don't think they have anything better than queen g3. Maybe they'll play queen h3? Maybe. What do I also like here? d5 is also pretty tempting. Just advance in the center. What if d5, idea e5, knight e4? That looks pretty good. If d5 and they take, I can take on d3 in between move. And that should be strong. Okay, let's meet fire with fire. If they want to start some kingside aggression, we're going to meet them with an attack in the center. And I'm hitting this pawn. I mean, this pawn is triple attack now. Knight, pawn, and bishop on b7 behind. Meanwhile, I have ideas with d4 too if I want to try to shut out the knight and the dark square bishop, especially the dark square bishop. Yeah, d4 is a big threat as well because, like, say they play rook fe1 or, yeah, let's say rook fe1. Then I can play d4. The knight can't go to a2, so it'd have to go to either e2, which would drop the e4 pawn, I believe, or maybe knight d1, which looks horribly passive, and the bishop would be out of the game. So I'm liking our chances now. Takes on d5. Okay, so now I think it's important that I insert knight takes d3. Because if I don't, if I just play e takes d5, then there's bishop f5 hitting the rook. Yeah, so I should probably play this before doing anything. And now I'll take with the pawn. Because I want to keep this knight firmly planted on f6. Taking with the knight would be horrible because of knight takes d5. And then there'd be queen takes g7 coming. So we can't have that. Okay, now I have a better pawn structure. I have the two bishops. And I have the possibility of d4, shutting out their dark square bishop. And if I do that, I don't think my king will have anything to worry about. Yeah, and they play d4 voluntarily. That seems a little desperate or incorrect already. Okay, now we've got options again. Knight e4 was my first instinct, but then after knight takes e4, d takes e4, they can take on c5, and they would be threatening queen takes g7 again. So I'm not sure about that. I can take on d4. If I take on d4, knight takes d4, bishop c5. Seems like they can defend that knight sufficiently, though. So maybe c4 is the way to go. Yeah, maybe c4. Just shut some stuff down. c4, pawn takes, rook takes, maybe? Yeah, I think I like the look of that. Then if knight e5, maybe I can play rook takes d4. Or if not, just rook back to c8. On pawn take, it's also tempting to take with my pawn to open the bishop. But I kind of want this pawn on d5 to ensure that their d-pawn never advances. It's a nice benefit of that. It's a tough call, though. B takes c4, d takes c4, or rook takes c4. So, like, if b takes c4, d takes c4, what if they play d5? That's the move I'm looking at. Because then I can't take it with knight takes d5 because of the same reason as earlier. Knight takes d5, and then when I recapture, queen takes g7 mate. But I bet I could take with the bishop. So b takes c4, d takes c4, d5, bishop takes d5. That should be fine. You go knight e5 instead. Strange. So you're just going to give me the pawn on b3? I don't get it. Guess I'll take it. Yeah, I'm not going to overthink that. Now d3. Okay. So keeping a knight out of e4. Well, they got a couple nice pieces. Well, really one nice piece, the knight on e5. But other than that, I'm feeling very good about our pawn up position right now. Um, Bishop b4, maybe? Just to pressure the knight. Queen d6 is another possibility. Connecting the rooks. Queen d6, and I can try to get the queen into b4 so as to attack this d4 pawn. I could play knight d7, trying to just trade. But I think I'm okay with leaving this knight here for the moment. I'd like to play b5, but I can't do it right now. Could play b5, and after we take twice, play queen b6. Actually, that might be worth considering. Queen d6 or bishop b4 seem more reliable, though. I'm gravitating towards those moves. Let's do that. Let's play bishop b4. Pressurize the knight. I'm expecting knight e2. After which I can play like queen d6, for instance, maybe trying to go bishop a3. He does play it. Yeah, let's go queen d6. And I could just try to get all the rooks off the board. Like, next move, play rook takes c1, rook takes c1, rook c8. And that bishop a3 idea is also in play. If this rook leaves the c file, almost certainly I'll be playing rook c2. Thought about it on the last move, but if I had played rook c2 on the last move, they could trade and then go rook c1, and it might have been hard to hold that c-pawn. So I'm okay with doing it this way. Very interesting how the position shaped up after queen g3, d5. I kind of got everything I wanted. I got the bishop pair. I inflicted some structure damage on them. I took away their attack, shut down that dark square bishop. So I think d5 was a successful operation. That in-between move, knight takes d3, was important. I just don't really see what they do now. Like, f4 is the only active move I really see. Trying to go knight f4. But it's very slow. I mean, f4, say, rook takes c1, or even bishop a3. I mean, bishop a3 is plenty good there, too. But if, did I say f4? I meant f5. But if f5, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, rook c8, that also looks pretty good. And then if we trade rooks on c8, my bishop will recapture, and I'll be attacking that pawn on f5. Yeah, and he plays f5. Okay, so now, do I play bishop here, or do I just trade stuff? Ooh, actually, okay, if I trade, he can do bishop takes c1. That could be important, because then he'd be threatening bishop takes h6. And actually, I'm not even sure that's a threat, because I would have knight h5 in that case, but probably I should not allow that. Yeah, there's no reason to allow that move. Let's go bishop a3. I like this better. Just making sure that there's no tactics he can do after this move. Bishop a3. Does knight takes f7 ever work? Probably not. Nah, I can just take it with the rook even. Yeah, let's do this. So we're trying to get at that c1 square. It seems weird to go after such a clearly bad bishop. But after noticing that rook takes c1, bishop takes c1 actually activates that piece for him, decided to go with this. Okay, so he's going to chase my queen. I think queen b4 is good. Stay active. And we're attacking this pawn on d4, so this knight can't move anymore, because it needs to stay defending it. Rook into c2 next, or maybe b2. That's the plan. I'm under 5 minutes. He's got 6:45, but I feel very much in control now. Yeah, I see this move just blunders to queen takes d4.
Check.
No reason to look at anything else. He's just dropping the knight. Queen takes e5. So a blunder in a bad position for white, but I think the game was lost anyways. Yeah, and he resigns. Okay, let's go back and have a look. So e4, c5, b3. Offbeat move. I mean, black can do a variety of things. Like, almost any move is playable here for black. Even g6 is playable, believe it or not. This line. Kind of crazy, but true. But I played b6. Bishop b2, bishop b7, hitting the pawn. Let me just add the engine. So, like, I would like to play knight f6 after this, but I was worried that e5, knight d5, queen f3 is a problem, and that looks to be the case. Because then my knight is pinned. Like, if I take or move it, queen takes b7, and they're hitting the rook in the corner, too. And if I play, like, queen f3, e6, I think just bishop c4, and they add a third attacking piece to d5, and I can't defend that. Probably just lose a pawn here. So I decided to play d6 first, then f4, a6. This was experimental. I mean, as I said, I'm moving a lot of pawns. I've only moved my pawns and developed my bishop yet. a4, somehow that move seemed cooperative. I mean, I kind of want to play b5, but not right now. So I wonder if they can forego that move. I was kind of banking on the fact that this bishop doesn't have a lot of enticing squares to develop to. Like, if bishop c4, I can play b5 and attack it. d3, as in the game, is not so great. e2's passive, so I mean, maybe white should just go g3 and try to fianchetto. I don't know. The computer likes queen e2. Unusual looking move. Or d4. Try to get the game back into an open Sicilian, maybe? That would be weird with the fianchetto dark square bishop, but white does have a lead in development here, so I could understand why that is possible. But they played a4. I went knight f6, attacking the pawn. Yeah, and maybe white should think about playing e5 either here or sometime soon. Because in the game, like, e5 was never achieved at a great time for white. You know, like, when it was played, it didn't have the same effect as it might have had earlier. Yeah, so, like, let's say e5 right here after knight f6. I was mentioning a few possibilities, like knight fd7. I could just try to retreat and not take the pawn yet, and maybe bring this knight to c6 or the queen to c7 to further attack. And I feel like if they take, that kind of helps me, because then I get to develop and attack their f-pawn. So, I don't know, maybe even here, e5 is not so good. I could also take once and then play, like, the knight back here. It's another possibility. If they take with the knight, probably just knight bd7 or knight c6 for me, one of the two. Maybe a4 is to blame, and that white should just try to do without that move altogether. Probably d4 is the best move. But after bishop d3, knight c6, castle, bishop e7, queen here, yeah, knight b4 is pesky. I don't have to quite commit my king yet, so I can just go here and tie down their bishop. Oh, and by the way, the trick that I was mentioning was if they play e5 here, I'm pretty sure I can just win a pawn. Like, d takes e5, f takes e5, and then knight takes e5. Easy move to overlook from white's point of view if you're not familiar with this tactical idea. So if they take, then I have queen d4 check, forking the king and the knight. Good one to remember. Happens in some closed Sicilian and, like, Grand Prix variation lines. So he instead played queen e1. I went knight b4. And this seemed very strange. I was pretty surprised by this knight g5 move. Maybe queen g3 is better. Just pop out and attack this pawn. Then I can castle, and it's kind of like the game, except white didn't waste time going knight g5 back to f3. My pawn is still on h7, but that didn't turn out to matter too much. So I don't think it's worth the two tempos that white expends here in order to get me to play h6. So here I just castled. Yeah, rook c1 also seems kind of inconsistent. I mean, with rook c1, they're essentially saying, I think, that they want to move their bishop. But that doesn't look like a feasible plan. I just played rook c8 now. The computer's telling me to go d5, but I think rook c8's fine. And if the bishop moves to, like, c4, I'm ready to play d5. And again, e2's passive. It leaves e4 pretty vulnerable. I'm not sure I would take e4 right away, because they do have bishop takes a6 at the end of this line, uncovering an attack on my bishop and hitting the rook. I saw that possibility, but I also thought, like, if bishop e2 was played, I don't have to overreact. Like, yeah, maybe d5 is a decent move. Play in the center. Instead, they went queen g3. I played d5. They went here. If e5 had been played, I was planning on playing knight e4. And I think this is excellent for black. So takes, and now take here. A key in-between move, because if e takes d5, there is this bishop f5 move. And white does not have to part with their light square bishop, and they're moving here with tempo on the rook. So knight takes d3, pawn takes, e takes d5, and I was feeling good now. I felt like d4 was on the table, blocking out these two pieces, especially that dark square bishop. White played d4, but just didn't look good for them. I thought they should take on c4 now, but I would have taken with the rook had they done that. D takes c4 also good. On d takes c4, I was kind of worried about d5. The main point being that I can't take with the knight because knight takes and the queen and the bishop are ganging up on the pawn on g7. But maybe I don't even have to react to the d5 move. The computer says just play it cool, just play rook e8. What if knight e4 then? Again, hoping for knight takes e4, queen takes g7 mate. Knight h5 is good. I guess I can play queen takes d5 next move. Or bishop takes d5 and attack this. Queen takes d5 seems more natural to me. Black defends. But I think they should have taken on c4. I'm not sure knight e5 does much. Yeah, I mean, if the computer's suggesting knight b1 in this position, it already looks a little desperate. Although knight b1 does enable queen takes b3, so there is something to be said for that move. Probably it's just the best move. Not an easy move to, like, think about, though. White played d3 instead, keeping the knight out of e4. And then I went bishop here. I think that move's fine. So now I don't have to worry about hardly anything having to do with my king. I'm not going to completely forget about my king, because if they're going to get back in the game, it's probably going to be because of some kingside attack that they whip up, since we're up a pawn and we're kind of dominating the game. But at the same time, I feel like I have a high degree of safety in this position, because it's hard for their queen to coordinate with any other piece to create threats against my king. So here I went queen d6. I think I'm okay with that move. Yeah, and as I mentioned, I thought f5 was essentially the only active thing white could do. Like trying to get something going with maybe knight f4, or in some cases like a rook lift, but it's so far out there it's probably not going to work. And then bishop a3. If I take on c1, they can do this bishop takes c1 move and bishop takes h6. Although I expressed some skepticism even of that, because let's say I play rook c8. They can't do bishop takes h6 because I have knight h5. Attacking the queen and defending g7 simultaneously, my next move will be queen takes h6. Like in the event of this, I can just swoop over and have one apiece. So maybe it was possible to take on c1, but bishop a3 seemed simpler. Yeah, we traded, and it's like -3 for black, not good for white. Yeah, so knight f4, big blunder at the end, but even with best play, I think black should be winning this the majority of the time. The computer says queen e1, trying to trade and maybe hope to win this pawn in the endgame. Queen takes e1, rook f takes e1, b2. Probably I'm going rook c2 next move. I mean, this knight is strong, so I will have to play around that or try to get rid of it sometime. Yeah, so white has some outside chances here of holding. But check. This just ends the game immediately. The knight is lost after the king moves or whatnot. Okay, so I think the critical moment in this game was when I was able to play d5. And usually pawn clashes in the center are points in the game to pay attention to, because a lot of the future course of the game will be determined by what happens with those pawns. And here it just turned out after e takes d5, knight takes d3, I got the upper hand. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I'll be back tomorrow with another video. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.